Uh, well, here we are. Uh, so, on this channel, we cover a multitude of subjects, yet we always tend to come back to these, overriding themes in terms of spirituality, usually with an emphasis on kind of manifestation ideas. And recently, we've been covering a lot of the misrepresentation of those manifesting ideas in the social media space, the YouTube space, the Reddit space, and elsewhere, TikTok, Instagram, etc. Just so you know, this will gradually, this too shall pass. Usually, we cover themes for, I don't know, whatever feels right for me. A week to 3-4 weeks max, and move on. Yet there are undercurrents that remain, obviously. And one of the undercurrents of this channel, without question, is the criticism of the spiritual bypassing in the manifesting community. Now, I've experienced it most in the law of assumption community, but without question, it's a thing, a huge thing, huge problem in the manifesting community at large. So, yeah, I think it's extremely important to remember that, and for me to remind you of it, from time to time, sometimes constantly, which is what the last few weeks have been, pretty constant, my criticisms of it. And that's because I feel like, there are very few people on YouTube talking about the ugly underbelly of the manifesting community. They have the, Eisenhower had that great quote about the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower looks like a pacifist compared to, how military and, how much money is spent on military and warmongering today. The military-industrial complex, well, in a lesser degree, obviously, but there's something like the manifesting industrial complex, because people exploit the vulnerability and the desperation and the gullibility of good folks in order to make a quick buck, or as an ego trip, in manifesting circles all the time. I'm going to put a link above to the recent video I did where I talk a little bit about this, and how most of the manifesting information we've seen puts a real emphasis on marketing and not necessarily that much on education. Now, when it comes to Reddit, it's a little bit different, because it's like the blind leading the blind. A lot of these coaches that you see online, like on YouTube or Instagram, first of all, might have something good to say. They legitimately might have some very good information to share. However, I would say the majority of them are, even if they have good information to share, if they're very successful, it's because they're extremely good marketers. And their marketing trumps most of what they have to share. This means that what they share with you might be helpful, but it's in all likelihood not going to be as helpful as they claim it will be. And this is just a continual issue that you'll always see. And I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to those people, but I'm saying you should be leery of believing all the promises that they make. Now, when you get to something like Reddit, you don't have people making a buck off of it. You don't have professional marketers, on there really usually. But you have people who have bought that, they've bought that, toxic positivity, basically, that false optimism, that false promising, and believe it. And they act like it's all going to be easy and da-da-da-da-da. And it's just, it's a place where the blind lead the blind. And that's why, like, for instance, the Neville subreddit is such a disaster. You have all these people quoting Neville who are so in their heads about this stuff and are not actually applying it. Because once you start applying it directly, you usually get humbled sooner or later, right? And in all likelihood, if you're into this long enough, you realize there's a ton of parallels between what Neville is saying and what so many of these other great spiritual and manifesting teachers are saying. Neville is not that different than, most other manifesting law of attraction teachers at all. Listen to my podcast if you're unclear about this, and I think it will become relatively clear to you quickly. And I say all this because, as Cecilia and I went over last week, I'll put a link above to that as well. We're toying with this idea of having a small subreddit that tries to intelligently cover some of this material, meaning, manifesting ideas and spirituality. And as well as, Cecilia's really into habits, and I'm into habits too, so habit forming would be there as well, and stress management would be there as well. But I'm pretty skeptical that we're going to be able to do it well because of the shit show that Reddit is. But Cecilia and I have been texting a lot about it, and I'm going to be throwing some testers in, some test posts in other big subreddits over the coming days and weeks to see what the reaction is. And if you're interested in this, seeing what the reaction is, I'll put my Reddit handle below, because it's not Tim Grimes or Radical Counselor. It's some random sad leadership 4281 or something like that. Reddit assigned me a random username. But you'll see some of my former posts and the reactions they get in some of these posts that I'm going to make. So I share all this because one of the things, actually, I've got a very thick skin when it comes to the social media side of this because of what I've seen, what I've just described. And I know that, like, most people on Reddit, like the Neville subreddit, like, they don't know better. Like, I feel bad, I feel bad for them, basically, in terms of how they're getting to know Neville's advice, because it's a terrible way to learn his advice. So I don't really feel, that much. I don't feel like bad for myself when they say, like, negative stuff to me, because it's like, they're just usually they haven't experienced these teachings enough to have a very informed opinion usually. And it's like the blind leading the blind there usually, as I said. So one thing that does tick me off about it, though, and that also ticks me off on YouTube and elsewhere, is something you see a lot in the law of assumption community and in the law of attraction community, and this deals with toxic positivity. It's like people call me negative a lot. And I don't mind being called negative, and my criticisms often are negative, you could say. But, like, one thing I'd like to convey, and that's why one of the reasons I'm making this video, is like, I would say my outlook on life, my spiritual outlook, if you want to use that term, is exceedingly positive. And I would argue, if you do read Neville or read a lot of these other New Thought people, Emmett Fox, Joseph Murphy, I would argue that actually my spiritual outlook, or whatever you want to call it, whatever pretentious term you want to use, I would argue my outlook is more positive than those guys. But my outlook is also, I'd say, like, harder, it's more ineffable. I can't pretend to explain it. But the idea that God is here right now and you're already saved and you don't have to do a damn thing, it's what all these New Thought teachers talk about usually, at least on some level. And I really believe that. I believed that before I got into the law of attraction, law of assumption. However, my emphasis has always been, and still is, God's here right now, you're saved. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. You're already saved. It's all good. You don't have to achieve anything. It's not a path where you get to the end and you're enlightened. No, you're already enlightened. You already are God, literally. And if, you're wondering what I mean by this, I talk about this in some of the podcast and some of my more spiritual sounding videos and episodes of the podcast where we're not necessarily discussing LOA stuff as much as we're just discussing what I like to call deep spirituality. Teachers like Byron Katie, Jan Fraser, Nisargadatta Maharaj, even someone like U.G. Krishnamurti. They're talking about God right now. And like, you're already perfect. Fine. If you look at my short book, The Joy of Not Thinking, same thing. When I'm talking about the joy of not thinking, it's like you're perfect right now. Do you know what that means? It means all this manifesting stuff is just like, practical to improve your life, improve the lives of others, But you're already perfect. You're already perfect. You don't have to worry about imagining anything good. You're already perfect. So I have a very positive outlook in regards to that. That doesn't mean that I can't be critical, that I can't be, skeptical, have a healthy dose of skepticism. More mystical teachings, non-dual teachings, Zen teachings, they don't try to put things in a box and label them as much. They don't try to say this is good or bad or positive, negative, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Because the idea, if I dare say, is always like now. Reality can't be explained now. Now is now, right? So all these manifesting ideas, just use them however you want. And it's cool if you are on Reddit or do watch YouTube videos. That's fine. You don't listen to me. I'm just some other asshole talking about it. The underlying point that I like to convey to you is that you're already good. You're already all set. You have to do a damn thing. You don't have to do anything at all to change that. So yeah, it pisses me off a little bit when people say I'm negative. I don't know. What's there to be negative about, huh?